What are you doing this morning? Another beautiful day, chilly. But a beautiful day. It's a good day to be together. Go ahead and be turning to Mark chapter 13. I want to remind you that when Jesus was talking to his followers about the second coming, about this twofold end, he was talking to them. Guys, it's very important when we read Scripture to keep in mind who the original audience was. Nothing in Scripture was written to us. Now, it's written for us, but it wasn't written to us, okay? And there's a difference there. We learned from the book of Philippians, it wasn't written to us. It was written to a church of Philippi. Now, because it's universal, and that's the nature of Scripture, because it's universal, we get the same applications that they do. So, Jesus is talking to his followers about their concerns. You guys understand, the concerns don't end. They're very concerned. They've finally figured out, I think, this thing is coming to a conclusion. Jesus had told them he was going to die. He told them how he would die. And he's even warning them about what's going to happen to them. So I think they're becoming very aware, and that raises a great concern. They're going to kill him. He's gone. He's talking about coming back. And as we talked about last time, to understand resurrection, but to understand the second coming, how is he going to come back to the earth? Because they're understanding at this point his body, if he does die, it'll go into a tomb, etc. They understand a very limited amount about the resurrection, but this second coming, and I want you to think about, we have a word has been created to describe that called an incarnation. When God came into the flesh, that's called the incarnation. I want you to think about reincarnation. To reincarnate is to once again come back into flesh, okay? So their idea may very easily have been that he's going to reincarnate, that not come back as a bug or a mouse, but to come back as Messiah. But to do that, he's got to start over as a child and go through the same things that he went through here. And that would be very common to kind of assume that. We look back through 2,000 years of history, and it's all clear to us, so we don't have a tendency to think in terms of how they were receiving this. This is overwhelming information about he's coming back, and they don't know when he's coming back, etc. He said, destroy this temple, and it will rebuild it in 3 days, and that's about the resurrection. But this reincarnation, and I don't mean that in the Indian sense, I mean this to be reincarnated to return, that's very confusing. So how are we going to know? And remember, how are we going to find you? How are you going to find us? And he's laying those to rest by saying, don't worry. You got this. You will know. But in the meantime, if anybody says, there's Jesus over here, or here's Jesus, or somebody presents themselves as Jesus, don't believe them, because you haven't seen all the things that are going to be associated with his return. And, if somebody says, here's Jesus, you can look to the sky and say, well, the sun hasn't turned, no, you're fake. So it gives them great security that they're not going to miss him, that they're not going to be left behind. Now, guys, understand, this doesn't die here. If you look 1 Corinthians 15, Christians had this same concern, that what about those who are dead? When this second coming, and we go to meet him in the sky, what about those who are in the ground? Are they going to be left behind? All of these concerns, and Paul makes it very clear, they'll rise first. So don't be concerned. We get very anxious about the parousia, is the name of We get very anxious about this appearance of Christ, what the resurrection is, and obviously because we have relatively limited information about it. Thanks to Paul, we have considerable insight about what it means, and the particularly in one chapter, a lot of it comes down to that and how our bodies will change and all that. All right, so understanding he's talking to a Jewish audience, particularly those closest to him who've asked him, how are we going to know when these things are happening? And he's going to answer that. Now, before we get into that, are modern Jews, modern practicing Jews, a holy nation? No. Okay? And this is confusing. It's confusing to evangelicals, it's confusing to Jews, it's confusing to a lot of people. We've been studying Zechariah about God finally ending the covenant. When did the covenant end? It was nailed to the cross. So at the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, the covenant's gone.
And a new covenant has taken place.
A new covenant, which is actually a testament, specific kind of a covenant, okay? It's not dependent upon us fulfilling our part, okay, like the old. All right, so what happens to Israel when the covenant is dead?
They're just regular people.
They're just regular people, okay? Ironically, they become Gentiles because they become outside, all right? What's interesting is Gentiles are going to become Jews, or Israel, as Paul calls them. So we're going to have a flip-flop. So let me give you an example. For years, I've been using, for premarital assessment and marital assessment, there's an assessment called Prepare and Enrich. Prepare is for premarital couples, Enrich is for married couples. One of the professors I had at Oklahoma State University, Dave Fournier, was actually part of a 3-person team who developed this. It is the most utilized, most researched marital assessment, premarital assessment. And I've been using this thing for 25 years, okay? I was trained by Dave Fournier, one of the creators of it. So, and a great friend of mine. We've had a great relationship ever since I was at Oklahoma State. And the 3 people who were involved in it sold it. There was an equity firm who expressed interest in it, et cetera, and so about a year ago, it was sold, okay? I did a premarital assessment for a couple, and under the old style, they would fill out, you would send it in, computer would process it, and then send it back. So I sent it to Dave, and that's normally how I would do it. Dave sent back and said, we have sold the company, you're going to need to send it to this address, et cetera. So I emailed, we're still preparing Ridge, but it's owned by different people, and they said, all right, you know, it was going to be a $250 fee to be able to offer this. You know, like I said, I've been doing it for years. So I said, seriously? And they said, well, tell us about your training. And I said, well, I was trained at the feet of Dave Fournier. I've been doing this for all these years. And they said, oh, Dave kind of did his own thing. So you're going to have to go back through the training. But we will waive the $250 fee. So I had to go through about 18 hours of online training to do what I've been doing for 25 years, okay? It's kind of the same thing that happened to the Jews, all right? The old way is out. We've got a new way. To be a part of the new way, you've got to reestablish yourself. You've got to go back out the door and come back in the front door. And that's what happened when the gospel replaced the covenant. So the covenant left the Jews with nothing. Now, God settled with them in Zechariah that we were looking at. Do you remember what the settlement was? 30 pieces of silver. Remember? And he had Zechariah go throw it into the temple. And that's when he said, basically, and here's the problem. It's difficult for us to say today that Israel is not a holy nation. Now, what I want you to go back to is what God promised them. What was the Abrahamic promise? Did he promise them salvation? Now, he said, I'm holy, you will be holy. Okay? So, the idea that holiness was imparted to them, or he predicted that someday they would become holy, and maybe he meant through Christ, and the remnant did, okay? But what was the actual promise?
Well, and many people.
Yes. Your children are going to be as numerous as the sand on the seashore and all of that. And what was the second part? And through you, all nations will be blessed. There's the promise. The promise wasn't that you're my people and always be my people. It's you're going to bring, through your lineage, you're going to bring a blessing for all nations. Now, all nations have to become part of that blessing in the same way, including the Jews. Now, when they don't, they're like everybody else. They actually technically become Gentiles. Doesn't matter if they're circumcised because they don't have a covenant with God anymore. Circumcision doesn't mean that anymore. So they have to start from scratch, okay? Now, it's not really from scratch because they've got the prophets and they've got all of that. You know, they are closest. And guys, sometimes the people who are closest to the kingdom sometimes are the most difficult to convert. So anyway, there was nothing in the promise about being saved. There was nothing in the promise about going to heaven. There was nothing in the promise about you and me for all eternity. There was nothing about that. There was a promise that a blessing to all the nations was going to come. So that's been fulfilled, okay, through Christ. But it's only fulfilled through those who are the elect, okay? So it's difficult for evangelicals to say that modern day Jews are not a special people. They're special in the sense of their history, but they're nothing special. And look at it this way. What's going to happen on judgment? My holy nation is going to go to hell. How can you be holy and be lost? See, you're not. They weren't sanctified by the covenant. Okay, so I want you to understand that when he's talking to these folks about one event that has two parts, the end and then the end. He's going to talk about two ends, and he's going to see them as bookmarks, two sides of the same coin. And what's in between, to his discussion to them, is irrelevant. It's immaterial. How long does it take before the end begins the end? Doesn't matter how long it is, because for you, it's going to be the end. Not you that are asking me, but for the nation. Because God is going to give them, Jesus comes, he dies, he's resurrected. He's going to give Jerusalem, Judah, 40 years to figure this out. And then he's going to end it all. Okay? And that's going to, and the end for Judaism is this first part that he talks about. The end for Judaism is the last part that we talk about. Okay? So Judaism has lost their favorite preferred nation status, and they're going to lose their souls. And I want you to notice that he's going to intermingle those in this discussion. It's not a clear cut, all right, here's the destruction of Jerusalem, and then here's the parousia. He's intermingling them because he sees them as the same event. the beginning and ending of an event. Okay, so let's look at that. Verse 14. But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And let him who is on the housetop not go down or enter it to get anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are with child, to those who nurse babies in those days. But pray that it may not happen in winter. For those days will be a time of tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the creation which God created until now, and never shall. And unless the Lord had shortened those days, no lives would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he shortened the days. Guys, what he's saying is, if God didn't stop this thing, all of Israel would have been annihilated. Okay, just like many of the nations in Canaan had been annihilated, and some that were supposed to be annihilated weren't. If God didn't stop this thing in 70 A.D., Israel would be no more. Okay, now part of that is he did for the sake of the elect. There are Jewish Christians living in Jerusalem at this time. Okay, and those are the elect. And so there's going to be a remnant come out, not just of Christians, but of Jews as well, okay? But he shortened the days. And then if anyone says to you, behold, here's the Christ, or behold, he is here. Now, he's going to iterate this twice in this discourse. Behold, here's the Christ, or here he is. Do not believe him, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show signs and wonders, if possible, to lead the elect astray. But take heed. Behold, I have told you everything in advance. But in those days after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. All right, he's describing the end of the end. When he describes the abomination of desolation, he's talking about the beginning of the end. And the beginning of the end is Zechariah's description of the separation of God and Israel. God saying, I'm not doing this anymore, and I'm not going to protect you anymore. I am going to shepherd you up until the time Christ comes. I'm not going to let you get scattered or whatever, because he's going to come out of you. Plus, for you to have my elect status, you've got to re-enter through him. So I'm not going to let you be destroyed. But once he comes, we're done. We're going it's a divorce. We're going our separate ways. Will I take you back? Yes, but only through Christ. Verse 24, but in those days, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers that are in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send forth the angels and will gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest end of the earth to the farthest end of heaven. Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already been tender and put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize that he is near, right at the door. For I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all of these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But on that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Take heed, keep on alert, for you do not know when the appointed time is. It is like a man away on a journey who, upon leaving his house and putting his slaves in charge, assigned to each one his task, also commanded the doorkeeper to stay on the alert. Therefore, be on the alert. Notice how many times he's saying, be on the alert. For you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening, at midnight, at cock crowing, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, be on the alert. Worst thing that can happen is to lose your alertness, what he calls being asleep. When Jesus comes, will there be people physically asleep? Yes. It depends on where you are on the rotation of the earth, right? If he comes at 9 o'clock on Tuesday, will it be day here? Depends on where on the earth it's 9 o'clock on Tuesday. So, yes, there'll be people asleep. He's not talking about physical sleep. He's talking about becoming a sluggard. He's talking about getting glazed over. That's why he says, be on alert, be on alert, be on alert. You see, it's very ethnocentric for us to believe when Jesus comes again, he's going to be in the sky above us. Okay? He's going to be in the sky somewhere. And this is going to be glorification. All of the heavenlies are going to shake. And, the other descriptions of the second coming, and nobody is going to doubt what's going on. Nobody. And so he's telling them, don't be concerned. When you see these things, you know it's me. Other than that, do not listen to anybody who says they're the Christ or the Messiah, or he's over here, or he's over there, or whatever. If it's not surrounded with heavenly hosts and angels, who, by the way, he's going to send to the four corners to gather his elect. Now, what do you think that's going to look like? Have you ever tried to envision that? How many angels is that going to take? Will it be one for Tahlequah, or will it be a series in Tahlequah? You understand what I'm saying? Do you understand one of the reasons God has surrounded himself with heavenly hosts is in preparation for this day, when they're going to gather the elect from everywhere? Now, does that mean they're going to drop by Coy and Connie's house? Come on. We got to go over, to Tom's house. So, get in the bus, He doesn't describe how that's going to be, but it's very personal, isn't it? You may very well be true. Yes. Pardon me? Yes. Didn't give a timeline on that, but yeah. I mean, there's no doubt. We're all going to rise and meet him in the sky. It's going to be. So I want you to go back to the original. When are we going to know when this is happening? How are we going to connect with you? Don't worry. It's going to be a huge deal. Dave? Not to me. I'm sure everybody got it, but okay.
Jesus said, nobody knows, not even me, the Son, that I'm coming back. Okay? Is there anything else that the Scriptures definitively tell us that only God the Father knows and not even the Son?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so anything along that line would be pure speculation on our part.
Correct.
Okay, you got it, see? You got it.
Well, once you broke it down into little morsels that I could swallow, I got it. And that's... Yes. Now, then he's going to say how to watch to expect it. He's going to talk about the fig tree. And this is interesting because nobody knows, but watch for it. And here's what's going to happen before it happens.
I think what's interesting, Steve, God the Father is keeping that even from the Son.
I've been giving thought about that why, and this is part of Philippians 2, he emptied himself of, and it's not he emptied himself of his deity, but he emptied himself of his equality and became like man, servant, etc. Why would God withhold that from his son? It's not trust. My speculation, and this is speculation because it doesn't say, is that Jesus would share urgency. I'm convinced that Paul thought Jesus was coming back pretty soon. I think it's very possible that Jesus thought he might come back soon. Because the time has, I don't know that there was a consideration of 2,000 years or things like that. I mean, because if you think about 2,000 years, 5,000, you lose your edge. And so I think that in his mind, and also the temptation, guys, it's going to be centuries. Don't worry about it. The temptation to discredit, yeah. And I think the urgency in the immediacy is he didn't want his son to, in my opinion, to transfer a sense of not complacency, but, hey, don't worry about it. It's way down the road. I think Paul had a very immediate, yes, Gwen. Yes, exactly. Be aware and don't fall asleep. Okay, don't. When we talk about being asleep at the switch, it's that same idea. Don't have your mind on something else, et cetera, et cetera.
I do take that literally, like I said, that verse. However, that verse could mean while Jesus was on this earth, once he ascended, died, and rose, and ascended to the Father, he might know now.
Exactly. Because that now is not going to impact his ministry on the earth. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they may be looking at the calendar together. You know, because to a certain extent, he's going to have to prepare to come back. You know, I mean, there's, and they could be talking about that right now, or I'll tell you later, son, you know, as you get closer, I'll let you pack and all that kind of stuff. But I think withholding that information was for us. It wasn't need-to-know situation. It was, this is urgent. And so he's going to say several times, be alert, be alert, be alert. When you say that, your expectation is it's going to happen while I'm looking at it. Well, it is for the first part of the end. And he told him, and by the way, he mentioned this generation will not pass away until these things come to pass. Now, all right, he went from, and as we talked about last time when he says, don't go back in your house, hope you're not pregnant, hope it's not winter, that has no relevance to the second coming, okay? Because in an instant we'll be changed. So if it's cold outside and you're going to be instant changed, it's not going to be relevant. But it is when the Roman army comes. When you're about to be destroyed and chased out and all of that, if it comes in winter, it's going to be a hard time, all right? If you're pregnant, it's going to be a hard time. If you're in the field, don't go back in your house. And the reason is when they come, they're going to build a phalanx around the whole city, and you're going to get trapped in it. And it's very common to bunker down when you see the enemy coming. We close the gates. We have these walls that have been built to protect us. We bring in all the farmers and the shepherds and all that into town, and we shut it down. And that's fine because Rome's going to come down, and they're going to encompass it, and they're going to shut it down even more. Now you're trapped, and you're going to die. Guys, it estimated over 1 million people died, and they starved them to death. They cut off water supply, they cut off food supplies, and wait. Time's not their enemy. They lay siege. We don't see that kind of warfare anymore. But it's incredibly brutal. And as we read about when Samaria fell, it got down to where they're eating children, And we shake our heads at that, but we've never seen ourselves as extreme. Had a friend whose dad was in a prisoner of war camp in World War II, and he would never talk about it, but I was over at the house, and it was just me and him for some reason. And I can still picture it. He had enough beers that he was feeling no pain. And he was talking about what it was like. And he said to me, don't ever say what you will or won't do until you're in the situation. He said, I've eaten things that I would never. He said, if there was anything in that camp that offered any protein, you ate it. He said, now you can use your imagination about what might be in a prisoner of war camp crawling around, but if you can eat it, because they were starving us, Yes. And dignity's out the window and all of those kinds of things. So this was a terrible tribulation. And in verse 24, he says, but in those days after the tribulation, the sun will darken. In those days. See, if you take that literally, it's just a matter of days. Well, it is, but how many? Now, when he says, this generation will not pass away until and this was really the turning point for Max King. Because if that generation couldn't turn or wouldn't pass away until they saw all of it, then Jesus had to come in their time, the second time. And he believed that Jesus came as a spiritual visitation, etc. I want you to notice the comparison because he talks about this generation. And let me put it to you another way. This generation is not going to miss any of this. Okay? You're not going to pass away without seeing this. Now, pass away doesn't mean die. Because then he goes on to say, the earth will pass away, but my word will not pass away. So, how could that generation live to experience all of this when it's been 2,000 years? Logic would say he's not saying you're going to be alive. He's saying you're going to experience it. Now, were they dead or alive in between the beginning and the end? Do you know what I mean by the beginning of this tribulation and the end of when he comes? Were they dead or alive? I am the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Nobody's dead. Nobody's dead. Nobody who's ever lived on the earth is dead. Correct? They're asleep, as Jesus talked about Lazarus, but they're not dead. So how can one generation see over 2,000 years plus span? Because they've never passed away. Pass away means basically annihilation. They're not annihilated. They're going to see the beginning and they're going to see the end. Did we get to see the beginning? Were you in Jerusalem in 70 AD?
No, we didn't. No. We see it in our imagination as we read about it.
Yes.
But we were not physically there. Our eyes did not see it.
Right. So we have to imagine, and we can't imagine what it was like because he said the world is going to see something that's never happened before and won't happen again, and that's this abomination of desolation. And guys, interestingly, even though Josephus spent a lot of time talking about this, There's very little discussion about the fall, because we always, the fall of Jerusalem, because we always anticipate Pentecost and all of that. And we don't think about how final it was for Israel. Guys, after 70 AD, they haven't had land until 1948. And we can argue they don't have that. They're still battling for that. But they reconvened. Actually, it was Gentiles that gave them the land. They reconvened. They are planning to try to build a temple and all that God has not requested. Okay? This would be, ironically, a pagan temple devoted to God because it is not Christ-based. So it has to be pagan, okay? All right, now, you're not going to pass away. You're going to see all of this. Remember, he sees it as two sides of it. You're going to see the beginning of the end and the end of the end. However long in between is immaterial. But you're going to be alive. Now, you won't be on the earth. You'll be alive. And then you're going to see the second coming because you're going to be part of that coming. Because paradise and Sheol, all of that is going to be emptied when he returns. There's going to be heavenly hosts everywhere, and we're all going to be gathered together, every person who's ever lived, to judgment. You're going to see this whole thing. And so he's laying their concerns to rest, at the same time giving us a veiled view of what this is going to take place. There was a book written, I think it was in the 60s, The Day Christ Came. And it was a novel kind of thing describing to the best of it was about a milkman, I think. Yeah, if you've never read it, it's an interesting book, but he tries to take all of these ideas and instill them in what the day might look like. And I mean, I don't have any argument with it, because what he tries to do is what we all try to do, fill in the blanks. And and it's a day that will be unlike anything. And the mind can't conceive of it. And I think that's why he doesn't give us a whole bunch of details, because we can't even handle the majesty of what he gives us, much less, and there's no end to it. Well, what's going to happen to Johnny down the street, and on and on and on. So you're not going to pass away. You're not going to cease to exist. You're not going to be annihilated. You're not going to miss out. And here in 1 Corinthians 15, and it's the concern of being left behind, the concern of missing out. What happens if they're already buried? Are they going to miss out? But think about this. What happened if you were in ground zero of Hiroshima? Because there was not even dust left of you. Everything about you was vaporized. And that means you were given off into the atmosphere as heat. There's no dust. There's no bones. How's God going to resurrect that? Same way he created it. This is not a problem, okay? So, oh my goodness, what happens with Grandma? She was in Nagasaki, and she was at ground zero and was vaporized. Is she going to be left behind? Because there is no trace of her anymore. Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Because matter cannot, it can be transformed, but it cannot be. It's out there. Now, we can't measure it. We can't collect it, etc. But God will. Comments, questions at this point?
Steve, what's the difference between dying and being dead?
You mean dying and being asleep? Jesus called death sleep. And so we have to differentiate what we call physical death and spiritual death. We have to differentiate sleep, which is the transfer from life as we know it into the transfer of spiritual existence, that transformation. So it's a little bit of a play on words because it has two meanings. And the problem is we connect those. We talk about someone dying, and what we understand that to mean is their body ceased to its existence. But we know they're not dead. So nobody's dead. Now, have they died? Well, they went to sleep using Jesus' word. But no, they haven't died. You can't have eternal death or eternal life without having eternality, okay? So there is no, and I think in modern mind, death means annihilation, and that's growing. That when you're dead, you're like Rover and dead all over. And when we bury you and you return to dust or ashes, that's it. And that's what the world means by death, and that's why I really like Jesus' reframing of it. And and they didn't understand it. Well, if he's asleep, he's dead, guys. He used there. But he wants us to understand there's no such thing. It's just a doorway of transformation is all it is. So we got to be careful. We got to contextualize how we're using death. In a funeral, we may talk about death, but we've got to contextualize that because this person, good, bad, or indifferent, they're not dead. Their body has ceased promoting life, but they're not dead. Their essence is not dead. All right. Got a couple of minutes if there are any closing remarks, because we're about out of time. Be on the alert, because the master has left and he's given everybody jobs. Be on alert that, in guys, the idea like in Thessalonians where you had people saying the Lord's coming again, let's quit our jobs. Let's go get us a cabin up in the mountains, just wait on him. No, don't let him come finding you sloughing off. Let him come finding you busy at what God has given you to do. He needs to find you on the job, not in bed. No. Exactly. Keep your eyes. And then he talks about the parable of the fig tree, 28. Now, I want to close with this. And guys, I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I don't think people are that smart and unified. But I want you to understand that God is not arbitrary in what he does. And when the day comes that he says, all right, that's it, we're going, it's not going to be, he wakes up and has a bad day. It's going to be all according to a plan. And if you'll notice, when he's destroyed, it was always that way. For instance, the iniquity of the Amorites was not full, so I'm not going to destroy them yet. Now, what it took to fill that cup, he measures that. He taught us through Abraham what it took for Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham kept negotiating him down in how many souls. And part of that is to show how corrupt it was. And he couldn't find 10. So we're done. Now, I want you to consider this. Consider this considered for your approval. We're coming into an unprecedented time. I'm going to pontificate, but I am not going to predict because no one knows the time. But it's interesting, we are reverting to pre-Babel days. We're doing that by overcoming language barriers. And we're right on the cusp. I mean, you already have the technology with your phone to be able to do live translation. You can go anywhere in the world now. A little bit cumbersome, but that's going to be taken away. And they're predicting an earpiece that you can wear that live interprets both ways what you're saying. So you can talk to an Italian, speak English, he'll hear it, Italian, he'll speak Italian, you'll hear English. Once that's happened, we're pre-Babel, all right? Now, I want you to consider the global access of the internet. I want you to consider the potential of the global idolatry of artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence is about our intelligence, okay? And that's what's it's already solving our problems, right? People are submitting all kinds of things, and this is going to be the savior of mankind. Now, I'm talking about if it becomes what they're anticipating. But I remember the segue, so I don't put a lot of stock in those predictions. You know, I remember virtual reality and how it's going to change our lives, and I don't put a lot of stock in those predictions. But I want you to see that there's a possibility that we're becoming global, and with that, the message is instantaneous. These things have never happened before. And could it be kind of a perfect storm that leads up to global idolatry? United under one God, and that one God is going to be... Folks already are accepting that whatever you get off ChatGPT is true. It's accurate. They're already accepting that, rather than, ooh, this is, and if AI, and if we come up with general AI, that's where it's thinking for itself and all of that, it's going to tell us how to do everything, all right? And we could be coming to a time that God is saying there's no hope anymore, there's no future. What he showed us with Sodom and Gomorrah and other things is the future is not going to bring change. It's just going to keep getting worse. That was the flood, when the thoughts of every man was what? On evil?
Evil all the day long.
Yes.
All the day long.
And what Babel did was preventing that evil from spreading and harming everybody, because there's independence now. Now, when you get back beyond that, back to Babel, then it becomes, let's build an empire and put our name on it so we can have a name, okay? And that name is going to be the all-knowing. And the all-knowing is going to be going to make, us subservient or whatever. And this is all speculation, but what I want you to consider is there's never been a time where, because we've had, like, when the church starts dying in the United States, it's growing in Africa or it's growing in Central America, but there's going to come a time when there's going to be a global think. And we could very well be approaching that. So that still doesn't tell you times. But what I'm saying is the result of that is be on alert, which you should anyway. All right, let's take a break, get ready for our assembly.